I have a fractured rib at the moment.
Oh my God, how did you do that? What are you doing?
I wish it was that. Nowhere near as exciting as that. I was doing sparring the other day at Muay Thai and someone like kicked me and they just got me like right on the rib. And I think it was a little bit of like, obviously sparring, like you're supposed to go gentle. I think they went a little bit harder than they should have. And it was also just like perfect placement right on the rib. And I was probably breathing out and just like a combination of factors.
Just the timing of it.
Yeah, just everything. And at the time I was like, oh, I was sore and then just carried on. And then I got home later that night and oh, it feels really, really sore. And then it continued to get more sore sore. I'm not sure which is the right one over the week. And then almost a week later, I was like, this should probably be easing off if it was muscular. It should be gradually lessening. So I went to A&E and they were like, yeah, you have a fractured rib. So, yeah,
They can't really do anything for that, can they?
no. Basically just rest it, pain medication, do deep breathing exercises to help with the muscle area and stuff. But yeah, there's not much they can do.
Have you broken bones before?
Never broken a bone before.
Yeah. Oh, do you know how rare we are?
No, it's actually really rare, isn't it?
I'm touching wood. I think the. Well, no, I think I've had a hairline fracture on my middle finger where I shut my hand in the car door. That hurt.
Yeah. And you're lucky to have a finger.
I know. Do you know what, when I did it, luckily it was an older car. This was when I just met Stuart and we were leaving the gym and I was putting my bag in the car and then I was going to go and say goodbye to him in his car. And I literally, you know how sometimes when I tell this, people are like, no, I never do that. But sometimes if you're getting multiple things, like you'll like move your door and hold it with your hand.
Mm.
Oh, I did
Yeah.
that, but I didn't need to. And then I just slammed my door. But I think because it was an older car, it didn't like lock or anything. But
Yeah.
this moment where I was like, I'm going to open this door and my fingers are going to fall on the floor.
Oh God, that must have been awful.
Oh God. When I opened the door, I was like, oh God, what is this? And they were just really red and stuck in a position that I was in the early days of dating Stuart, and I was just far too embarrassed to tell him that I just shut my own hands in the car door. So I just went
You
up.
didn't tell him?
I didn't tell him. Swallowed the pain, and I was just like, I've just got a really bad headache. I'm gonna have to go. And I cried all the way home, and I phoned my sister, and I was like, I think I've broken my fingers. And I woke up and they were like swollen and purple and green. I ended up going to A&E and they were like, you're lucky you've only got a hairline fracture on the middle one. You'll be okay. Traumatized. It was so painful though. So painful.
I don't know when, I don't know how to feel about the fact that you were like, yeah, I'm fine. And just went on, like, you have some pain.
That just speaks to my need to not be seen a certain way out of fear of being rejected. That's what that was. I was like, he's going to think, who is this? How does one do that? I
mentioned this in the last episode.
I know, right? I haven't done this storytelling. Maybe we can entwine it into our topic today of, we're talking about identity today. Maybe we can entwine it into that. I don't know.
How do you feel about doing this topic around identity?
I feel like this topic and the one that we've just talked about, which is not feeling good enough, I'm worried that I'm going to end up repeating myself. I'm worried that it's going to merge. But I think with all of these topics, there is an overlap of things.
Yeah. I agree. I think there can be strong overlap between identity and self-worth. So it's probably quite a nice follow-on, to be fair, from the last episode. So if you haven't listened to the last episode, go and do it. I'm joking, you don't have to do anything that you don't want to do. I feel a bit giddy about talking about this topic.
Really?
Because, yeah, like, I find like discussions around identity really interesting. I think they can go into this big like existential or spiritual kind of who am I? What am I? What are we kind of place, which I like. But I'm also aware that those kind of discussions don't have that ability to be tied up in a nice, neat bow. And, this is a clear answer. There's a lot of like ambiguity and murkiness around it. So I want to do it justice in a way that we do explore the nuance of identity, but also it's not too chaotic for people to listen to. And I think the other thing is a lot of what we do on like my counseling course is a lot of this kind of self-reflection. We have personal and professional development groups, which is like taking a topic and going, what are your views on this topic? What's another person's views on this topic? And picking all of that. And how do you relate to other people? And like, how do you relate to the world? And it's very introspective and very self-reflective. And I love that. But also it can lead, for me anyway, at times to that feeling of like, I don't know who I am. Like, because I'm like unlearning so many things about myself and then relearning new things about myself and holding all these different, like, nuanced kind of perspectives. And it can feel like really enriching and really like there's no like certainty. And I think that's why I'm feeling a bit, giddy.
I'm picking up on that energy. I'm feeling
Mhm.
that. I can get that. Depending on where I am in my life and what's going on in my world, what you're talking about and like evolving as human beings. And on some days, it feels like, Katie, you have permission to change. Like, you're allowed to change your mind. You're allowed to change your opinion and your views at any point in your life. Like, you do not have to formulate who you are and put it in stone and live by it. Like, you're allowed to change your mind, take the pressure off. It's okay. That can feel really freeing. That can feel like I don't have to have all the answers and I can take each day as it comes. And then there's other periods in my life where I feel like, no, I need to know where I am. I feel like I need to sit and write a list of what do I believe? What are my opinions? What do I value? All these things so that I can feel like, okay, this is me. Now I can work with this. Now let's go through life with this. So even just that changes how I feel about it. What I feel I need for myself changes depending on the season in my life, the stresses, how I'm feeling about myself, all these other things.
Absolutely. I totally get this. And when I was reflecting on identity, I was thinking like, identity is difficult because it can feel like you want to have this concrete answer of this is who I am. Yep. I know me and this is how I am. And I think I can anyway, listen to certain people talking on podcasts and maybe reading like books about people's lives or whatever. You can feel like, oh, this person knows who they are. That they're talking about themselves in quite an absolute way. So they know who they are. And it can, for me, sometimes feel like, I need to have this real absolute knowing of who I am. And actually, sometimes I just feel like I'm a big bundle of contradictions.
Same.
I'm like, yes, I am someone that really values like mindfulness activities and is really curious about myself as a spiritual being. I'm also someone that really just likes to zone out and watch a sitcom. I'm someone that I do see myself as quite adventurous and I've got this quite, I'm going to go get it kind of attitude. And at the same time, I'm also someone that really struggles with self-doubt and like self-belief at times. I feel intensely trapped by routine. If there's like routine, I can feel really panicky and suffocated. At the same time, if I have no routine, I can really struggle like with how do I navigate my day. And sometimes I feel like, who am I then? Because I feel like I'm both of them and they feel like the complete opposites of each other. And I guess that's what you're speaking to when you say some days you want to have that list that you right, this is me. And then other days you're like, actually, I can be whatever I want. And I think identity is, I think it's quite fluid
Yes,
times.
that's exactly right.
And it's more nuanced. And I guess to tie into that like opposites, we put that into the eating disorder context. We like, okay, the restrictive part of me is the part of me that's very controlled around food and quote unquote discipline and doesn't need food and completely like surpass that kind of need can manage hunger. And then we've got the binging that actually comes in and feels like the complete opposite of that. It feels completely uncontrolled around food and it feels absolutely ravenous. You have no control around hunger. It feels like you are completely disciplined and you know, which one's me? Well, they're both me, but that feels confusing because how can I be the two opposites of each other at the same time?
Yes.
That feels really conflicting.
Yes. And this is where parts work was always really helpful for me to think of myself not as just one whole being that is very black and white, but understanding that there are layers to me. I am an onion, shall I say. I think as well, you were talking about when you're restricting and you feel like control, and then you feel like that's the part of you that can control hunger and things feel easy, and then you have the part of you that's binging and feels ravenous. And the way you're talking about that was how I totally relate to feeling that contradictory behavior in disordered eating. And the real thing being the wanting to lean to one side and wanting to put myself on one side was the actual part of the problem. Like, it's the tying myself down was always the problem for me. Like, it's the over identifying with something. It's the needing it to be one thing. When I reflect back on my history with my eating disorder and how it changed and evolved throughout the years, and how before recovery I was predominantly in the sort of wellness industry, do I say, as in I was very much into the clean eating, and it's the over identification of any of these things that is the thing that ties me down. That is the thing that I drown in. As human beings, we want that there is safety in black and white. There is safety in knowing where we stand in something and how we feel about something. And that does help us have our sense of self. And there are definitely opinions that I have that haven't changed for a long time. And I think there's room for that. I think we're allowed to be solid in things. But I think in wanting to seek identity, there's the tendency to over identify with something and leave very little room for the complexities of life and the environment and what we have access to and things changing. And that's where it can feel like you're very tied into this sense of who you are, that if one thing falls out of place, you feel like you completely crumble. And that's how I felt before recovery, where it was like, I have to go to the gym at this time. If I miss a day, everything falls apart. Like, I have to do all of these things whether I want to do it or not. And I don't know how to feel about myself if I do not complete these tasks. It's such a rigidity mindset.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because as you were saying that just there at the end about the gym, it made me realize, so I can't go to the gym at the moment because of my rib. And can I feel the impact of that on my mental health? Yes, I can. Like, it's been over a week since I've been able to do any sort of strenuous movement, which I know in the big picture is not really a huge amount of time. But I can feel like there's like this kind of restlessness in me. There's an itchiness of I just want to move my body and exert it, and can't do that. And I can feel that as just a slight drop in my mood. However, the difference is in the past, when I'm really identified as like the fit one, this would have derailed me much more, because now I'm like, okay, it's a temporary thing. I feel a bit restless and itchy, but it's okay. Like, it doesn't really change who I am as a person. I don't feel like less than. Whereas in the past, I'd have felt like, who am I now though? What do I have to offer the world if I'm actually not going to the gym and being that fit one? I don't feel like I know who I am anymore. Whereas I still feel like me right now.
Yes.
So it is exactly like you say, it's that attachment or over identification to something, isn't it?
Yes. And I think, as you say, you can recognize that you can feel the restlessness. And yes, you can feel a drop in your mood. And in an ideal world, you would have some form of movement in your life. But your ability to manage that feeling without feeling like you need to resort to behaviors that aren't helpful for you, that's the practice, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. It also makes me think about, I don't know, what you said made me think about a lot of things. You really sparked lots of thoughts. Thank you, Katie.
Oh, no. I don't think you needed that. I think you had enough thoughts.
It makes me think of like the teachings of like Eckhart Tolle or Tolle, or however you want to pronounce his surname. I actually never fully know. If anyone actually knows,
I think everyone says it differently, don't they?
Yeah. Anyway, spelt Tolle. Make what you want of that. I often think about him quite a lot when I come to kind of identity and thinking about the ego. And like, his theory is we have a true self and we have a false self, or he called it the ego. And the ego is that part of us that over identifies with thought. So like you have thought or a story and you fully attach to that or identify with it. So that might be, let's try and think of an example. You have a binge and you have the thought of, oh, I'm so lazy, I'm so undisciplined, I'm so greedy. And actually, you then fully identify with that thought and believe those things about yourself and then live your life based on that belief about yourself. And that's the ego, which is what I hear you describing of that over identification with something, but in a different way. You were talking about over identifying with like wellness culture. And his theory is actually that's not our true identity. It's like a false identity. True identity is when we can step back and observe those thoughts so we can see, oh, this is a story or this is a thought that I am greedy or that I am a wellness guru or whatever. But that's not, I don't have to identify with that because you're stepping back and you're just observing it and you're seeing it. And I have found that really helpful at points during my recovery, kind of idea of being able to observe the thoughts and having to believe it or identify with it.
So it's a very similar idea to like your thoughts are not the truth.
Yeah.
But what you're describing there, I found that instrumental in recovery, especially as someone who I am always in my head. My thoughts are always going a million miles an hour. Because I recently found out that Stuart doesn't have an inner dialogue. And I'm like,
I question this when people say they don't have it in a dialogue at
he
all.
doesn't know. Unless he's actively thinking about something, he's not thinking about things. So like if we're driving and it's silent and I'll turn around to him and like, what are you thinking about? He's, oh, nothing. He's genuinely not thinking about anything.
Do you know why I find this difficult when people say that? It's because it's human nature for us to think. That's how we make sense of the world. I do agree that some people have more incessant thoughts than others, right? So let's take someone who has ADHD. Their inner monologue might be like there's more going on than someone else potentially. And I say that because I question whether I have ADHD myself, right? And there is constantly an inner monologue and lots of different kind of thoughts going on at the same time. And I think that some people will have that less for whatever reasons. But I really find it hard to think that someone doesn't have those thoughts because it is how we make sense of the world. And and also I'm like, if you look at meditation and spiritual philosophies and stuff, one of the ideas is of like, how do we observe the mind or how do we get to that point where we're not just part of incessant thought? So if he doesn't have any thoughts, I'm like, what, is he enlightened?
Well,
I don't know. Is that?
you ask him,
Like,
I'll find out. I'll report back. I think it's more so that like he has thoughts, but he doesn't attach to them. He's more able to let them exist without spiraling with things or like going from one thought to another. Don't get me wrong, I don't think the man sits in silence. I don't think the man sits thought free, but I think he's far more able to experience less in his head and not think about multiple things at one time. I can't do that. I'm always thinking about things, and whether it's like things I need to do or about myself or about life or about like my brain feels like it's always going. And this is
yeah,
why I found it so helpful to bring it back to what we were talking about, because I did forget, was that being able to not take myself too seriously. In a way, I say that cautiously because there are absolutely so many times where I'm feeling a certain way and it's a call for my attention and I have to slow down and I have to think about why certain thoughts are there, why I'm feeling a certain way. But being able to, as you said, with the ego, like I get to establish what I want to take on board and carry with me and what feels like either past me or something that's being influenced by other things going on in my world or something that I'm probably thinking as a result of stress. And like being able to be really curious about what I'm thinking rather than always taking every single thought I have as face value and as accurate information. Because when we understand, and this is what was so helpful in recovery, understanding the way your brain works, the way your nervous system works, how your brain acts when you're triggered and when you're in a heightened stress state, all of these things, when you can recognize this, you are far more equipped to be able to pick apart, like, what is something I need right now and what is actually probably not helpful, but is maybe like past habits or past thinking patterns that are there and I can acknowledge them, but I don't
Mm.
necessarily need to run with it.
Absolutely. I think that is a really helpful practice to have, in recovery and just in life, to be
Yeah.
honest, to be able to go, okay, hello, little thought. I acknowledge you. I don't have to follow you, kind of thing. Like,
Is that how you do it in your head?
yeah.
That's so cute. Hello there,
Yeah.
little thought.
But it also is making me think of there's another teacher who's called Adyashanti. Again, he's a spiritual teacher, and he had described this exercise that I've been practicing to some extent recently, again around thoughts. And his theory is every single thought we have has its own identity, it has its own worldview. And you could take any thought, like absolutely anyone. So it could be, if we to go back to the binging, you've had a binge and you say to yourself, I'm so greedy. Let's take that thought, then getting curious about this thought, like, where does this thought come from? How does this thought view the world? How does it see other people? How is it seeing, and based on that worldview, what does it mean about me? It's like you can really unpick every single thought because it does have its own kind of, so like its own entity in itself. I find that a really interesting practice. He said he would sit and do it for hours. He'd sit and pull apart one thought. But this is why he's enlightened and we're not.
To be fair, that was a helpful practice in recovery, especially around things like fat phobia, understanding where that comes from. A lot of body image work. What are my views of bodies? What are my opinions here? Is this actually mine? Has this come from someone else? Can I disregard this now? Do I actually believe this? Does this feel aligned with me? Especially if there's resistance there. If there's a resistance there, there's a conflict there, there's something that's clashing. And I think the key piece to what you're speaking to is curiosity, isn't it? And doing it in a way that's very explorative.
See, I think this is why it gets me a little bit giddy, because even though I can with these kind of topics get to the point where I'm a bit like, oh, there's no answer, I just hurt my head. I'm also like, God, this is so exciting, right? So
Yes.
get into this. Although if anyone's sitting there thinking, this does not sound exciting at all, this sounds like
Overwhelming.
fine and daunting, but totally get that. Yeah. How else did you see kind of identity? Was there anything else that came up for you around identity and like your eating disorder?
I wrote down grief of letting go
Okay.
of my identity that was very much centered around disordered eating at first, and then it morphed into more that like exercise, fitness aesthetic. I think we can't deny the role of external validation in the shaping of that identity. I think for a lot of people, if their body changes, and I experienced that even in the depths of my eating disorder when I was too thin, I was still receiving validation and acknowledgement and praise for how I looked. And it gives you something. It like lit a fire in me. And so it felt like recovering and knowing that I was walking away from that, knowing that I was letting that go. It was grief. At first, it was grief because I felt like I would have nothing else to offer. If I didn't have my body, if I didn't have this, then I have nothing. And that feels really scary to build that from the ground up. I don't even know where to begin. And what if what I have to offer isn't all that great? Then I have to face that. I have to live in that. I can't deny that for myself. So there was a grief in letting go of that. There was grief of the fantasy version of what I thought my body would ultimately look like. And that would be the body that would carry me through my life. And because I thought that having that body would give me certain things in life, whether that be the relationship, the career, the job, anything like that. It felt like letting go of the body was letting go of the fantasy, which in turn was letting go of all of these other things that I thought were only attainable through my body looking a certain way. There was the grief in and of itself probably could be worth a whole episode, to be honest, because I felt the grief in different ways throughout the whole of recovery and still experience it now. Like I went up in the loft to get my Christmas decorations down. I found a box up there of some clothes that I'd put away when I'd done a clear out when I was in recovery, and I knew I was putting on weight and I couldn't quite part with clothes that I knew didn't fit me or weren't going to fit me. So as a stopgap, I just thought I'm just going to box them up and put them in the loft so that I don't have to see it. I don't have to open my wardrobe and look at clothes that I can't fit in, because that's just not productive. And I totally forgot about this box. For the short period of time that I did wear them and they did fit me, I felt so good in. And I think I felt good in it more because it felt like I'd accomplished something and I achieved something, and it gave me a false sense of power and superiority. It wasn't anything that was of substance, really. But I had this real wave of grief of, yeah, that was hard. That's hard to let go of that. I did have that fleeting longing of, oh, I still wish I could live in that body. I don't know, with all the body image work, I very rarely experienced the grief like that. And that was
Yeah.
obviously, as a result, coming face to face with something that was a reminder of that period in time. But yeah, that real kind of mourning, it felt like mourning
Yeah.
for the person that for the majority of my life up until I began to recover, that I thought I was and I thought I had to be. And I thought that was the version of me that I just needed to uncover. I just had to find it. But that was my true self. Obviously, I don't feel like that now. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't have much to add to that because I feel like you like really could really feel that process of grieving
Yeah. It's
that you
weird,
went
isn't
through
it?
and grieving that not just the body, but everything that the body represented and
Yeah.
how you saw yourself in that body. Or like there's like your whole identity was wrapped up in it.
There's so many layers to it, and it really is just crap. It was crap, but putting a name to it was always really helpful, reminding myself, like, I'm grieving this and I'm grieving something that's very real and that was very dominant in my life. And you just have to ride it out. It is the letting go. And it wasn't until the far later stages of recovery where I started to feel safer around food. I wasn't thinking about food as much. I wasn't thinking about my body so much, and I could expand and open up my world a bit. I could reflect back and it felt less like heavy grief, and I could start to feel a bit more empowered. So that kind of came in alongside that, I would say.
Do you think that was as you started to find your new identity?
Yes, I remember feeling like I'm building on something that feels much more foundational than something conditional that I feel like I'm always on the cusp of it being taken away. So I could
Yeah.
feel that. I could feel that sense of authenticity, I think.
Yeah.
And that felt
Yeah.
far more solid for me.
I agree with you on that. I felt like when I was in the eating disorder, I was very identified with how I looked and my body and really thought that's what I could offer the world. I really loved that kind of the validation of how I look, like that praise, that kind of admiration almost of people like asking how I'd lost the weight, or like it felt like at the time I read that as connection with other people, but it wasn't really deep connection. It was like admiration. It was like, I'm here and you're there. We weren't together in that. And I feel like what I noticed really changed was actually I wasn't getting that instant gratification from people as I went through recovery and my body changed. There wasn't instant like approval, but then the relationships I have developed have been like deeper and more meaningful and more equal and more connected. And that was an interesting transition to go through. And at times there was part of me, I still want that, like, I want that admiration because it gives me that reassurance. Okay, yeah, cool, someone is seeing me and they value me. But actually I realized like it isn't really, it's quite hollow. Even if at the
Yes.
time it gives you that feeling, it's actually quite hollow. And in other kinds of like friendships where it is, like you say, more foundational, it's more solid, there's more substance. You might not get that kind of verbal recognition quite as much, but what is there is deeper.
Yes. I wholeheartedly agree with that.
The other thing I thought about with identity, and I would be really interested to hear what you think on this, okay, is I think you touched on it a little bit earlier that when you were talking about over-identification and you spoke about like wellness culture and you over-identify with wellness culture. And this led me to think about, I think sometimes the over-identification can be that we want to put a label on ourselves and feel that kind of, this is who I am. This is because this teaches us like where we fit and it can give us a sense of belonging. So I think you can see it in many different ways. That people maybe, okay, I identify as this and that's where I belong. Like an example is like religion, right? You might identify as a Christian, so then you know that you fit within the Christian community. So it can give you that kind of sense. And I'm not saying this is necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes actually this way of identifying can be really connecting and really nourishing. In other ways, it can be a way of trying to seek that kind of like belonging. So I see that I did this with veganism, that I identified as a vegan. And it's because it gave me a kind of a mask for restriction as well. I could restrict and say it was because I was vegan and didn't have to really challenge that in myself. But it also did give me that feeling of I belong within this community. There's a load of other people who think and feel the same way as me. Now, I'm not saying everyone who's a vegan who does this, and this is why I'm interested to hear your perspective, because I know that you're a vegan, aren't you? And I have friends who are vegans, and they're definitely not doing it for this reason. They're doing it because of their like morals and their ethical beliefs. So again, I'm not saying that identifying in this way is necessarily a bad thing, but I can see for me how it has been a way of me trying to find belonging through identifying as something.
I was talking to my sister about this. I really hear what you're saying about the identifying with something as a way of giving you a sense of belonging. And in terms of the way you relate it to veganism, so I was vegan for over 12 years, and the past few months have started reintroducing eggs into my diet for various reasons, mainly because I kept craving them and it felt somewhat conflicting for my intuitive eating sort of value that's important to me in honoring my body and what it needs. And it keeps asking me for something. And I keep coming back to this. Starting to think about, am I going to have eggs? Am I going to kind of break this long lasting veganism? I really feel like I'm going to piss people off with this topic. But when I first became vegan, I've been born and raised vegetarian, so I've never actually eaten meat. So that's all, and I've maintained that. I'm still vegetarian now. So I've never had the meat. So going vegan, I used it as a way to additionally restrict food because I would binge a lot on chocolate and ice cream. And so I thought if I eliminate dairy, and this was when I must have been 18 or 19. And at that point, like the vegan options for food was not what it is today. So for me, there was a part of me that did it through a disordered lens as a way of eliminating a food group that I had a difficult relationship with. And it also was important to me from an animal welfare standpoint. Like, I can't deny that that is important to me.
Yeah.
And I felt very strongly. I used to follow a lot of like vegan activist accounts, and I was involved in that sort of thing for a while. And I'd feel a lot of anger about it, and I'd be very passionate in conversations about it. But then I found like I got to a point where it's not that I don't care, and it's not that it doesn't matter and it's not important, but it's not a place I put my energy anymore. I wonder if when you're younger, and as you talk about, it gave me this, it was nice to have something that I felt passionate about.
Yeah.
That I felt like I could talk about and that I had conversation about, and it felt like I was doing something that mattered. And then as you get older, it's less about, hey, I'm doing this, look at me. It's like you eliminate the noise, and I don't need that. I don't need
Mm.
that to portray that message for me. I
Yeah.
can find that in other ways of my life, or I don't even necessarily need that to the extent that I needed it. And this is where, again, we've talked about like permission to change your mind and change your
Mhm.
opinions, and that you're allowed to change your opinions. And yes, you probably will piss people off and people aren't going to like it. But I think it's really important that you be okay with pissing people off, because I kept coming up to this barrier of my body wants these things and it's really conflicting with who I am now. And
Yeah.
I think I'm going to have to do this, and I feel okay with it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's not to say someone who does follow that diet and does want to make that their thing that they're passionate about and go continue with activism. That's wrong. It's just
No.
everybody has their different paths and their different causes that they're fighting, and we can't do it all. And maybe that's not in for you in this lifetime. That's not your like battle to fight, because you have your own thing going on with that, and you need to. I suppose it's like a conflict, isn't it? I guess what I'm hearing is you got to this point where you're like, okay, so maybe the thing I'm really passionate about is helping people find like a balanced relationship with food and body image in a peaceful way. And actually part of that is following this intuitive eating framework. Then there's this part of me that actually feels like part of my purpose is to fight for animal rights and raise activism and all of this. Now the two are colliding with each other, and you can't do both. So maybe it's actually this one here around activism around like helping people find peace with food. That's actually more my battle. This is where my passion lies, and this is my purpose, and someone else's might be the other one. That's how I'm hearing it.
Yes. Yes.
Doesn't mean it's not important. It's just maybe not my thing.
Yes. I think as well, one of the key pieces in this is the fact that I could not deny the fact that there was motive to go vegan in order to restrict food.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I wanted all food to feel neutral. I really wanted that. That felt like it was more important to me in that time.
Yeah.
And I think this is even the practice within what we're talking about with the temptation of over-identification, in holding space for other people and their difference of opinions as
Yeah.
well as our own.
Other people's differences and your own ability to change. Because if you're really identified with something, it's very hard to allow yourself for those thoughts and beliefs to change because there's too much riding on it. Whereas actually, if you're not over identifying with it, things can change and be fluid because it's not too threatening.
Yes.
It's not threatening your sense of self anymore, is it?
Yes, exactly that. Yeah, I feel like you've tied that up well.
Oh, I think. And identity is interesting because I feel like our identity can be very shaped by like our context. So I was trying to think about this in the sense of like how I am here and turn up and I'm on the podcast is one way, but then how I am as a manager at work is slightly different. And then how I was when I was a teacher, teaching in the classroom, again, slightly different. How I am with my family. There's these kind of, I don't think we can say that we're fixed in a certain way. Like, obviously, there's still going to be consistency in who you are in those different contexts. But depending on the other person and like how they respond to you, like that relationship you have with those other people and whatever the boundaries are within that relationship does determine how you show up in the world and shapes your identity to some extent. And this is really interesting when I was thinking about it, because I feel like when I was living with an eating disorder, I felt much less certain of who I was, that like I was a bit of a chameleon, like depending on which friendship circle I was part of, I would adopt those interests or I would adopt those ways of dressing or those kind of beliefs. And I guess where I got to with this is like, what's the difference? Because we aren't always the same in every single context. Depending on who we spend time with, we do change slightly. But I guess where I landed on this, and I don't know how you feel about this, so it'd be interesting to hear what you can add to it, is I see in when I was in the eating disorder and I like morphed into different people within different circles, that felt more like a change to meet others' approval. And it felt like a self-abandonment. It was like, I'm abandoning myself to be part of this group, to fit in here.
Yes.
Whereas the other context of identity change, it doesn't feel like I stray too far away from who I actually am. It's just different parts of me, some weaker or stronger, depending on the relationship and how we relate between each other.
Yes. Because the latter is necessary, isn't it? In our day-to-day
Yeah.
life, we have roles in which we need to step into. I can't fully be myself in a work environment because that's not my role. I need to show up in a different way. I think it's the intention behind the
Mm.
action, isn't it? Because as you said, when you describe yourself as being like a chameleon, you're doing it as a way of, as you said, self-abandonment. It's a way of hiding yourself. There's probably some shame there. I don't feel safe to show up as myself, so I need to show up in a different way in order to fit in.
Mhm.
Whereas what you talk about in day-to-day life, the intention is showing up in a way that's respective of said roles, isn't it? And
Yeah.
there are different versions of ourselves that we have to
Yeah.
step into as a part of navigating life. I think the difficulty can probably show up when we feel like we spend too much time in one role and not enough in the other. Because I
Mhm.
imagine, like for me,
Yeah.
being at home is when I am at my most authentically me because I am comfortable.
Mhm.
I have access to everything I need. I'm doing what I want. I'm not having to present a certain way or anything like that.
Yeah.
And I've had feelings before in the past when I've been in a job that I haven't been fulfilled in, haven't enjoyed. I have felt really conflicted about going. And so I remember feeling so incredibly lost in myself because
Mhm.
I felt like 80% of my week is spent in a role that I don't want to be in, that I have to show up in a certain way. I have to keep my mouth shut. I can't say how I really feel. I have to pretend to care about things I don't really care about. And that's encompassing so much of my life that I have a very small window where I can actually like just be myself. And I think
Yeah.
that projected onto a lot of binging, actually, to be honest. I was seeking myself, really. And food was being like, hello, we need attention here. Obviously, the reality is that you don't always have the luxury of being like, I quit this job. I'm not going to do it anymore.
So the binging was, again, felt like the binging was speaking up for
I think it was my
some kind of
authentic self.
needs
Yeah.
that were lacking. Like, yeah.
Yeah.
When you were describing that around the intention, it also made me think there's a hypervigilance to that change in identity when
Mm.
it's in order to fit in, because there's always this, for me anyway, there was always this feeling of, am I going to be rejected? Am I going to be ridiculed here? Are they going to see the real me? Am I actually going to be, are they going to see through me? If I do this, will they still accept me? And that's a very hypervigilant way of being. Whereas the other kind of change that I'm describing, which is actually a very natural change in how you present yourself, depending on the context and the people you're around, it doesn't have that feeling for me. It's okay, I'm going to work, I'm the manager, I'm going to present this part of me, and these other parts of me maybe won't be shown as much, but it doesn't feel like an abandonment. It feels, I don't feel that like panicky sensation. I still feel very much me. There's still a sense of like peace within me. Yeah, I think that's something that's hopefully helpful for people to think about, as in what kind of, do you feel like the hypervigilance, or do you feel a sense of peace when you show up in a certain way, in a certain context?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really valuable.
And then lead with the final question, which I don't think there's going to be an answer to, but I would actually really love to hear what people think. And I asked this because my therapist asked me this a couple of months ago, and I always come back to this question and like, oh, I really don't know. Do you think that we have one core self, or do you think that we have multiple selves? Because we talk a lot about parts, But at the same time, we also talk about being your authentic self, which is like the language there is slightly opposite. So this is where I find it quite.
But then are you asking, what is your core self then? Your core self has these values, these opinions, all of this stuff, and that is solid and that is no longer going to change. Is that who you think your core self is?
Well, I guess it
Because
depends
if you
what you
do,
think the
then I
core
would
self
say
is, then,
no.
doesn't it?
Yeah, because
Yeah.
I would say when you ask me that question, the idea of having a core self feels anxiety inducing to me.
Mhm.
Because I'm like, then I've got to figure that out.
Yeah.
When do I know?
But then if we go back to like
change,
a spiritual perspective of the self is the observer, that's not made up of multiple parts, is it? What is it? Like, is that just spirit? Is it? Because we're not talking about that in multiple parts. Or are you saying that your core self is made up of all of these different parts? But then if the self is also the observer, what is observing? Are all those parts observing at this? Oh, do you know what I mean? It's really difficult when you get into this question.
for me personally, I need to have multiple parts and I need for that to be like something that can just exist.
Yeah.
I think, because then
But
that
then
feels like I have freedom of
Mhm.
change.
Yeah. I quite like the idea of like internal family systems, because obviously internal family systems is based on parts, right? It's all about parts work. Then there is still the self that's behind the parts. And the idea is the self is observing all those different parts and making sure those parts work together. So then that would suggest, even though there is parts, there's still one self behind it. I don't know. I get myself tied up in knots with this.
I think I have to think of myself as a tree.
Okay. Oh, I love an analogy. Go for it.
And like at my core is my roots. That is myself. That is at my baseline me. But my parts are my branches and my leaves and all my other things. And we go through evolution and things can fall off and things can break. But fundamentally, I have my branches and it's not necessarily about fitting it all together to make one pretty long-standing tree. It's allowing the evolution of the seasons of we lose this, we gain this. We're a little bit fuller over here and not so much here, but we're all existing and it's having space for it all to exist as a tree. Does that make any sense? It's really weird.
Yeah, no, it does make sense. Really like that, because also what you're saying there is you can't, like the idea of parts and a self, that you can't, it's not either or, that like completely interconnected, like they are one.
Yeah.
Branches are not separate from the tree, they are
Yes.
part of the tree. I really like that, but I really liked how you said the branch can snap off, the leaves can snap off. It's that you can change and evolve.
Yeah.
And, oh, what a lovely analogy
go.
to leave this episode on.
And we thought we'd have no answers. That is somewhat of an answer. I have.
Please, if you're listening, we want to hear your thoughts. What do you think about identity and that big old question? Is there one
Do you know
cause?
what? I'm surprised with this episode. I thought we would spend far more time talking about body image and food, and I think we fleetingly touched it, didn't we? And I find that really fascinating.
I suppose because identity feels like a big, huge umbrella term.
Yeah.
That hopefully, by hearing us talk about identity, people can maybe slot in for themselves where body and food plays a role within what we've discussed. I don't know. Yeah.
Thanks, Becca. I thought you brought loads to the table. I feel like you were very inquisitive and I feel like I bounced off you. So thank you.
Feel really energized from that conversation. So
tell.
thank you, Katie.
I can tell. See, now you'll have a productive rest of your afternoon, won't you?
Yeah. I'm going to go for a walk now along the canal. I'm going to look at all the trees and just think, look at all those selves, look at all those identities.
Make sure you find one that you feel you really resonate with. Find your tree, Becca. Go and find your...
Well, I do have a tree, actually.
Of course you
Most
do.
places I live, I find a tree. And it's so funny you say that, because I've lived here for over a year now and I've been like, I don't know if I found my tree.
Well, no wonder you feel the way you feel, Becca. You haven't got a tree.
I know. And then literally yesterday, I went for a walk and I sat at a tree, and I had this moment. I was like, this is my tree. Like, I always sit at this tree. Whenever I get to this tree, I always stop here. I always sit for a bit. I take in the environment. I always give her a little hug. And I was like, how have I never seen you as my treat before? Or maybe I'm moving away from attachment. Who knows?
That's a whole different episode. We won't go there.
Thanks for listening, guys.
Thanks, guys.